And now, ladies and gentlemen, philosopher Stephen Harris. Hi, Stephen.
Hi, Nora.
How are you?
Oh, I'm fantastic. How are you?
Well, to be honest, my wisdom tooth is just killing me.
Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. Although, this does provide a perfect opportunity to consider whether it would really be better to be born in a world where there was no physical pain. Did you know that for Buddhists, this is actually a real possibility, because Buddhists believe you're reborn many times. And you can take rebirth as an animal, or you can take rebirth as a human, but it's actually possible to be reborn as a god in a heaven. And gods, it's actually a lot of fun to be a god, because you experience millions and millions of years of pleasure and have absolutely no physical pain. So you would think, if you had to choose between being a human or a god, it seems obvious, right? Take the god rebirth. But actually, Indian Buddhists think that there are some advantages to being a human that a god doesn't have. And part of the reason for this is that even though they don't experience any physical pain, a god still suffers from more subtle type of pain that contaminates their experience of pleasure. This is the suffering of impermanence, and it's the fact that pleasure is fragile and it can't last. Eventually it's going to collapse. So the gods can bliss out in their pleasure realms for millions and millions of years, but eventually the good karma that took them to heaven is going to be exhausted. And then they'll die, and they'll have to be reborn. Even Buddhist gods have to die. And once they're reborn, they can be reborn as a human or an animal, but it's even possible that they'll be reborn in the hell realm, where after all those millions of years of pleasure, they have to endure millions of years of suffering. But you might think, okay, but humans have to die too, right? And humans also, for a Buddhist, it's possible to be reborn in hell, so you may as well take those eons of pleasure that precede death. But even though the experience of being a god is incredibly blissful, there's also something deeply unsatisfying about the pleasure God experiences. And we can see this by considering how they treat another god when he's about to die. So when a god's about to die, he begins to let off this foul odor, a stench it's this sign that his karma is almost finished and soon he'll die and be reborn. And then the other gods shun him. They shun him, they abandon him, because they're so focused on their own pleasure that they can't stand the sight of this dying god. And so they have to cast him off. But there's also a deeper logic to this rejection of the dying god, and we can see what this is when we consider what it means to be compassionate. So to be compassionate means you actually feel the suffering of another alongside your own, as if it was your own, and it actually hurts you to experience this pain. So in a heaven realm, where the whole point of existence is to experience as much pleasure as possible, the gods who live there, they're psychologically unable to bear the touch, the empathetic touch, with this dying god, and so that's why they have to cast him off. And from this, you can actually see that in a way it's a tragedy to be born as a god, because it reveals the deep anxiety they actually experience the whole time they're experiencing bliss. The whole time a god's experiencing pleasure, he knows on some level that he's going to die. So his pleasure is neurotic, because he desperately craves the pleasure continuing, even while he knows it can't last. So all of those supposed eons of bliss, he's actually terrified. And from this story, you might feel a little bit of empathy for the gods who suffer so deeply from isolation and anxiety, even while all their sensual needs are being fulfilled. And if you do, then that's one way that being born as a human is better than being born as a god, because unlike gods, we can face our suffering, we can experience it, acknowledge it, we can even try to alleviate it, and we can empathize with the suffering of others. So Nora, so sorry to hear about your tooth pain, and I feel your pain as if it were my own. But I'm still glad you weren't born as a god, because then you wouldn't be this empathetic person that we all love so much.
I'm glad too, Stephen. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Harris.